Poverty levels in Kenya are on rise. Wow, this is not a so good news. I don't know whether you guys have consumed the news that has been trending for the better part of this week. I'm making this video on Friday, and for the last 2 or 3 days ish there, an institution by the name Oxfam has actually released some statistics that are not so quite good. Anyway, let me release this news for you and let you know what exactly is going on and what exactly you can do as far as this information is concerned and how you can get yourself out of this mess. Now, this is Good Joseph. In case you're watching me for the first time and you're wondering who is this guy, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure that you subscribe and leave a comment on the comment section. Now, guess what? We have a new statistics. In Kenya, we have a population of equivalent of, give or take, around 52 or 53 million there. Let's work with 52. That is the total population of Kenya. Can you imagine this? 125 people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 125 people. They have a wealth that is more than 43 million Kenyans. You tell me. Okay, as if that's not enough. Do you know over half of the population of this country, talk of about 26 million, are individuals who live under the poverty line? And can you imagine this? Let me just read this. I've actually summarized all this information here for it to make sense. Let me read for you. A tiny elite, the richest 125 Kenyans, now own more wealth than 43 million Kenyans. That is more than bottom 75 to 80% of the population. Can you imagine this? Nearly half of the population lives in extreme poverty. And how can you define an extreme poverty? Is people who are surviving on less than $1 a day. A dollar in Kenya is equivalent to, give or take, 130 shilling. It depends on when you're watching this video. That is the current exchange rate. In other words, let me just pump in some understanding on this matter. It means more than 26 million Kenyans, they survive on 130 shillings per day. In other words, they survive on only $1. That is what they rely on. In other words, that is what they make in a day. 130 shillings, that's more, that's like 4,000. That's like $40 in a month. 26 million. The funny thing is this. Kenyan economy is growing at a very high rate, especially from 2015. It has been getting what we call an average of 5%. And do you know what is 5% growth in an economy in terms of the GDP? 5%. See, when America gets 3%, it's a celebration. We are at 5%. Sometimes Ethiopia was growing even at 10%, 9%. Rwanda, China was growing at that. That is crazy figures. But when an economy is growing at a rate of 5%, that is a great celebration. Now, the question is, IMF is saying that our economy is growing at a rate of 5%. I saw they were revising our rates. They are expecting the economy of Kenya to grow at a rate of 5.6 or 5.8% thereabout in the year 2026. So far, it has been growing with an average of 5%. The inflation is going down. But that growth is not felt underground there. In other words, the trickle down. You see, the wealth comes from up, then goes to the bottom. Then, as the money comes from the up there, it is not hitting the bottom. Then you wonder, sometimes you can get yourself into a quagmire that, how do you explain those statistics? For those people who are economists, explain for us, what does that mean? Economy is growing at a higher rate. For example, for your information, Kenya has now surpassed Ethiopia as the 6th biggest economy in Africa. Africa is made up of 54 countries. Kenya is number 6. I think the biggest economy in Kenya, again, I go verify. I don't know whether it's Ethiopia or Nigeria or Egypt. Let's go with Nigeria as the biggest economy, followed by Ethiopia, followed by South Africa, followed by Egypt. Let's put, say, Morocco there. We put Algeria, then we put Kenya. Kenya, Angola, and Ethiopia. Those economies are like this. Usually, this one passes this one. So they are like. So now, Kenya poverty is actually on rise. The wealth gap, there is something called the wealth distribution. You see, there are different parameters that measures the economy of a country. We have the GDP per capita, GDP nominal, GDP PPP, that is purchasing power parity. We have the GNI, we have the HDI, that is Human Development Index, and what have you. Like how many people can access the average education in that country? Do people all have the toilets? All those are very, I don't want to go into those tough economical terms and what have you. But this information is worrying. This information is worrying. And you know, South Africa is the country that is not to have one of the biggest wealth gap. Go to South Africa. That's why the crime is high. Oh, my wonderful viewer from South Africa, Miriam. You know, she watches my videos almost all the time. Shout to you, Miriam. Thank you very much for always watching my videos. She can attest on the comment section. Crime in South Africa is very high because the wealth gap is too vast. The same case happens to, what do you call this country, our neighbor here? South Sudan, the youngest country on earth is the South Sudan, got independence in 2011. So this thing of poverty is worrying. And you know what scares me? The moment we have this bigger wealth gap each and every day growing, you know, crimes will go high, you know. And no wonder Kenya has been experiencing what we call, you know, rampant, what do you call it, protest, like day in, day out and what have you. Anyway, let me go ahead and read some of the statistics again for you to understand. Since 2015, the number of people living in extreme poverty has increased by 7 million. In other words, more people are slipping into poverty rather than them getting out of poverty. Sometimes I just feel like if I was the president of this country, I could just go to China and I do what we call apprenticeship. Instead of just going to China and shaking hands and taking photos with your flags behind you, why don't you just go there? We pay for your boarding school. You go to China, sit down with Xi Jinping. He tells you, how did that dude, I don't know, that dude got over 1.4 billion people, not million, over 1.4 billion people out of poverty. You need that brain. You need to sit down with that guy. He tells you, how did he manage to do that? Imagine Xi Jinping, the president of China, got more people out of poverty than the entire population of Africa, because the entire population of Africa is around 1.2 billion. China alone as a country is over 1. Whatever. Those numbers are crazy. I mean, you need to sit down with this guy and tell you, how did he get out of poverty? And I'm not saying that the Kenyan, what do you call them? Government are not doing the best. They are trying, but there's something we need to. There's some areas where we are not touching, you know, because it's worrying. Since 2015 to now, that's approximately 10 years. We've gotten 7 million people into poverty. I think I'm too patriotic with this country. Sometimes I feel too bad. In terms of income and earning disparity, a CEO of one of the Kenyan 10 largest companies earn an average of Can you imagine this? An average CEO in Kenya, in one of the 10 biggest companies, he or she earns 214 times more than a teacher. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. Them earning that anyway, maybe they deserve it on a very serious note. I don't want to get into that. That can be a bit controversial. In 2024, of every 100 shilling collected in taxes, 68 was used to service government debt. Mama yangu. In other words, let me explain this figure to at a personal level. Let's say you make 100 shilling in a day or in a month. 68 shilling out of that 100, you use it to pay debt. Then you are left with 32 shilling. To not only finance what we call the recurrent expenditures, but also to develop. Now, tell me how, when will we even get ourselves out of that mess? Because we're in a mess. Because if out of 100 shilling that we collect in terms of our taxes, 68 bob or 68 shilling, you know, in Kenya we call shilling bob, just like the way you go to America they call it a buck, and if you go to Britain they call it quid. Here we call it bob. 68 shilling goes to paying of debt. 38 is left, or rather 32 is left for development and financing the recurrent expenditure. No wonder government borrows. By the way, as I'm making this video, government has already reopened a new treasury bond, 2 of them, one for 30 years, one for 25 years. You borrow this one, you take this one to pay this one, you borrow this one, you take this one, I don't know. I don't know where we usually go wrong. I don't know. You guys, you can advise me on this. Because let me get this straight. More than twice what was spent on education and nearly 15 times that was spent on health. Because of this, under reinvestment, children from the poorest 20% of households get an average about 5 fewer. There was a time I came here and I made a video and I told you one thing. An average education in Singapore. If you go to a country called Singapore and randomly you pick somebody, you ask them, they have an average of 18 years in education. 18 years. In other words, that person has gone to school for the last 18 years of his or her life. If you come to Kenya and you pick somebody randomly, they have 8 years. You know, whenever citizens of a given country make a decision, I always tell people, sometimes it's not the leaders. Leaders are not the problem. Sometimes even citizens are the problem. Why? Because the decision that they make to put people out there, it's an amalgamation of their average thinking. Can you imagine this? Somebody who has ever, and I'm not saying that ultimately school is the one that makes people smart. To some extent it does. So you find this is an individual who has ever been to school for 8 years. This one has ever been to school for 18 years. In other words, tells you this, the average school of this individual is a primary school. That is the average. Kenya is trying, at least we are going the high school way. This tells you the average education of this individual is tertiary, university or college. Now take these two individuals, now tell them to make a decision in terms of choosing a leader. We are likely to get funny things. And that's why you find Kenyans elect very funny leaders with very funny names. Some people, they go to parliament, they can't even talk because they don't even understand in Swahili. They don't even understand English. And I'm not saying understanding Swahili and English, it's a measure of intelligence. I don't know. Those are just communication tools. They never sponsor any bill for. Anyway, let me not get there. So those statistics are quite worrying. Let me not even need you. Just go there. Go on Google. Just go on Google. I mean, I won't even continue with that video. It can actually make me bitter. Just do this. Yeah. Go on Google. Once you've finished this video, go search Oxfam or is it Oxfam or Oxfam, whatever. Go search economical reviews, and however you're gonna search it, you go consume that information. It's not so good information, by the way. It's not so good information. Anyway, this is Good Joseph at all the time. Make sure that you hit the like button. Make sure that you subscribe. And in case you need my services in one way or the other, go ahead and pick that number of mine and shoot me a text on my WhatsApp. And by the way, try to invest as much as you can. That's why I always tell people, sure, you may not be earning a lot, but let's try to safeguard our future. You see, I came from a poverty background or a poor background. And what I can tell you, try as much as you can, no matter how small money you get, try to just salvage so that at least if you have kids or you get kids, at least you leave them in a better position. We leave them go to countries like Dubai. Go to countries like Singapore, Malaysia, the emerging economies. Go to Indonesia. Those countries are really trying to, let's try. I know it's a collective individual. I mean, it's a personal individual, because when you work on your savings, you work on your investment, you salvage, you try to minimize for the sake of your future. That will mean good for your country as much as it will mean good for, or rather that will mean good for your family as much as it will mean good for your country. Anyway, guys, that is it. Let me not make this video too long. I think that is enough time. And let's see each other in the next time. See ya.